Hope your week is off to a great start. I'm Min Sun-hee with our panel of foreign journalists. As always, thank you for being here.
Good to be back, thanks.
Well, on a warmer note, news related to sports have been making headlines in recent days with Korean tennis player Chung Hyeon putting on a remarkable performance on the Australian court and football coach Park Hang-seo taking Vietnam's national team to new heights. We have details in our first report. South Korea rode an unusual tennis wave in the month of January. 21-year-old South Korean tennis player Chung Hyeon pulled off a series of upsets at the Australian Open, one of the 4 major tournaments in world tennis. Chung Hyeon moved on to the round of 16 after defeating the world's number 4 ranked Alexander Zverev. Chung Hyeon became the star of the tournament after defeating number 14 ranked Novak Djokovic by a dominant set score of 3-0 in the round of 16. After another victory in the quarterfinals, Chung faced number 2 ranked Roger Federer in the semi-finals, but he was forced to withdraw from the game due to a serious foot injury. Koreans voiced their support and encouragement for Chung, who rewrote the history of tennis in the country by becoming the first Korean player to ever appear in the semi-finals of a major tournament.
앞으로 나이도 어리고 그리고 또 메이저 대회가 계속 기다리고 있습니다. 분명 우리 정현 선수가 다음 대회도 좋은 성적을 거둘 거라고 믿습니다.
최고 기록이 이렇게 빨리 깨질 줄은 생각지도 못했는데 그 기록을 깼고 그러다 보니까 이제 더 높은 곳으로 올라가고 싶다는 생각도 들고 앞으로 이제 하나하나 풀어 나가야 될 것 같아요.
Meanwhile, in Vietnam, a South Korean soccer manager has become a national hero after turning its soccer team into a powerhouse, which had long been considered one of the minnows in the sport. On January 18th, the Vietnamese national soccer team, under the guidance of South Korean manager Park Hang-seo, reached the quarterfinals of the 2018 AFC U-23 Championship for the first time in the country's history. Vietnam was thrown into a mood of excitement and celebration after it moved on to the semi-finals and then on to the finals. Although the team finished runner-up after being defeated in the finals, the Vietnamese people expressed their gratitude and respect for manager Park Hang-seo.
Vẫn còn đau tim quá anh ạ. Kỳ vọng rất là nhiều. Thực sự các em đá đến cái vòng này rất là tuyệt vời rồi. Không còn những gì để tự hào hơn nữa. Mặc dù là thắng hay không thắng thì các em vẫn luôn là những người hùng.
Thật sự là rất đáng tiếc, nhưng mà cuối cùng mình cảm thấy là cái trận Việt Nam vào đến các em đưa chúng ta đến với cái niềm vui này là quá lớn rồi. Thấy thế là hài lòng lắm rồi.
Tennis player Chung Hyeon and manager Park Hang-seo have raised Korea's standing in the world through the power of sports. Their remarkable feats have earned the enthusiastic support of millions of South Koreans. Now, here in Korea, Chung's gains on the court have raised interest in tennis among the general public. Have you seen his performance on television, Frank?
Yes, I have seen his performance. I've seen him play previous to the Australian Open. It didn't come as big a surprise, I think, to a lot of observers that, for me, that he made it that far. I think he's a very athletic player, and he definitely has a future, and I think he'll have a long career in the high-level professional tennis ranks.
Right. Media in Australia talked about his appealing image, that boyish smile, braces, glasses. What are your thoughts about his image?
He's quite young. He's, 21 or 22 years old. And there's also the fact that he was largely unknown to the international tennis watching community because he was ranked globally, like in the 50s, and then suddenly had this big showing at the Australian Open. So all those elements coupled with the glasses, I think, and his story of how he started to play tennis or how his parents first encouraged him to play tennis add to that lore that make him more exciting for people to learn about.
Right. Koichi, how popular is tennis in Japan?
It's quite popular, and we have Kei Nishikori and Kimiko Tate, who once ranked top 4 among all the top players. We have mostly every junior high school and high school has tennis courts in Japan, but in Korea it's hard to find that kind of school. So maybe in the future, South Korea will find those facility.
Yeah, hopefully, because the infrastructure is not that as great, as in we don't have these courts in many of the schools. So hopefully.
Well, I think that's one of the things that makes Chung Hyeon's development so remarkable. You know, it's pretty cold here, so if you're going to play tennis, you got to be indoors. There aren't a lot of indoor tennis facilities in Seoul because of the issue of real estate and the cost of renting a court. And also, he's the first and really an exception. There aren't a whole bunch of players, South Korean players, that are at his level. He's almost a sole sort of beacon of tennis in South Korea, whereas other sort of tennis countries have several players that are ranked in the top, few hundred in the world. South Korea doesn't have that, and I think that again indicates how remarkable his achievement is.
Yes, of course. Are there any other Korean athletes that you know of or are fond of, apart from Chung Hyeon, etc.? Is there anybody else that you particularly like?
I liked Park Ji-sung, soccer player. Footballer. Yeah, who played Kyoto Purple Sanga and Manchester United. And quite many Japanese people think that he is one of the best Asian soccer player in Japan and Europe.
I see. What about you, Frank?
Well, I was a fan of Park Ji-sung too, and now Son Heung-min. I think he's a great player, and I think once that breakthrough is made, it's easier for the others to come along, as Park Se-ri, when she won the U.S. Open, her first major in women's golf. It just created this whole cascade of interest, and you've seen that with Chung Hyeon here. There were, runs at South Korean and Seoul tennis stores for people to come in and buy the same equipment that he used and to get involved in the sport. So I think we could see the same type of thing happen with tennis. And hopefully we'll see also a development of more leisure facilities in South Korea to make that happen.
Elise, do you suppose interest in Korean athletes has served to raise interest in Korea as a country?
It sure can, and we saw that certainly with the South Korean women's golf players. And also I think it's good for South Korea to be known for things beyond what it's currently known for, which is a lot of superficial stuff, right? Like skincare and makeup and K-pop. And these things are really only skin deep. So it's really good to have more diversity in what your country is exporting to the rest of the world culturally.
Right. Koichi, you spoke of this, but many here in Korea seem to be feeling a sense of national pride given Chung's gains on the international tennis court. Do you suppose this is the power of sports?
Well, I think so. We felt the same way when, Kei Nishikori went to a semi-final of the Grand Slam. And when I was in high school, there were no famous Japanese or Korean or Chinese tennis player. So we are all big fan of Michael Chang. So there are not so many Asian top players. So I think Japanese tennis fans also delighted to see Chung Hyeon's success. Of course, Kei Nishikori is just recovering from the wrist injury. So we want to see these, two Asian rivals play.
Right. Now, meanwhile, in Vietnam, Frank, coach Park Hang-seo, like I said in the report, has led the national team there to its first finals of the AFC U-23 Championships. What are your thoughts about this achievement?
Actually, this reminds me of the 2002 World Cup here in South Korea in Gus Hedink, and his position in sort of South Korean lore now. I think he was given citizenship, South Korean citizenship at a point, and he's appeared in advertising in South Korea, and he's really a lauded figure in South Korean sports history. And I think the same thing can happen with the South Korean coach in Vietnam, and certainly appears to be so.
Right, he's receiving the red carpet treatment. Do you suppose his achievements there in Vietnam have actually raised perhaps the image of Korea among the Vietnamese people?
Maybe. I don't think the Vietnamese people consider Korea to be that foreign. I mean, there's so much foreign investment from Korea and Korean businessmen in Southeast Asia. If you go down to Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, there's a big presence of, say, Samsung. For instance, Samsung has a lot of its factories, manufacturing plants in Vietnam. And so there's already plenty of cultural exchange. So I don't think that one particular Korean is going to really put Korea on the map in Southeast Asia, because Korea already is well known in Southeast Asia.
Right. Park was also awarded the third-class Labor Order. It's a medal given to those who've made outstanding achievements for Vietnam. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, it was the first time for Southeast Asian team to go final of the AFC U-23. So I understand how much excited about that Vietnamese people are. So I think it's worth getting some medals.
The Vietnam was excited, Korea was excited. Frank, do you suppose sports appears to have great power on people, over people? Why do you think this is so? An previously aspiring athlete, I think part of it has to do with the sort of unpredictability of it, and I guess the honesty of it. There's no hiding. There's a clear competition between parties, teams or competitors, individuals, that's played out, that is beyond the control of outside forces, and I think there's an integrity to that maybe people admire, and also an excitement to it in that the outcome is unpredictable, and I think it can bring forward elements of the best in people. Right. In our second report, we take a look at the power of sports to promote peace, which has been the case here on the peninsula on several occasions. The 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics will finally get underway on February 9th. The Pyeongchang Games aims to fulfill 5 key objectives in the fields of culture, environment, peace, economy, and ICT. But for many people across the world, the single most important goal of the Olympics is one of achieving peace.
우리는 평창 올림픽 덕분에 기적처럼 만들어낸 대화의 기회를 평창 이후까지 잘 살려나가는 지혜와 노력이 필요합니다. 그래야만 북핵 문제를 평화적으로 해결할 수 있고 한반도의 평화와 번영이 지속될 수가 있습니다.
The foreign media is also providing broad coverage of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics from the angle of security, aiming to address questions over tensions on the Korean peninsula and the prospects of peace. CNN reported that the Games could remind people of the Olympic truce, an ancient Greek tradition of peace, during the competition. Meanwhile, Voice of America reported that North Korea's participation in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics has diffused tensions over Pyongyang's nuclear and ballistic missile developments. There have been many instances in the past where sports was leveraged here in Korea as a tool to promote peace. The world became united once more during the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul after the 1980 Games in Moscow and the 1984 Games in Los Angeles were marred by boycotts over Cold War tensions. The 1988 Seoul Olympics became a platform on which the United States and the Soviet Union resolved their differences over Cold War tensions. During a high-level inter-Korean meeting in 1990, the two Koreas agreed on the need to promote sports exchanges to mitigate cross-border tensions. As a result, a joint inter-Korean team was created to compete in the 1991 World Table Tennis Championship. It was the first inter-Korean sports team ever to be created since the Korean peninsula was divided in two, and the 1991 table tennis tournament marked one of the key moments in history where peace was achieved through the power of sports. The 2002 Korea-Japan World Cup is also remembered as an important sports event that provided a platform for reconciliation between Seoul and Tokyo, which had been mired in bitter historical disputes. Elsewhere, the ping-pong diplomacy of the 1970s also paved the way for the United States and China to establish formal diplomatic ties. The cricket diplomacy between India and Pakistan is also widely regarded as an event where sports was successfully employed as a tool to promote peace. Sports has often been used as a stepping stone towards lasting peace. from the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul to the 2018 Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. We sit down now with our panelists to learn more about the power of sports in promoting peace. Now, as seen in the report, among the various examples of sports leading to peace, like the ping-pong diplomacy of the 70s between the US and China and the cricket diplomacy between India and Pakistan, what event was most memorable for you, Koichi?
Yeah, I still ping-pong diplomacy with US and China. But still, this kind of diplomacy works when the political condition is ready, but it's too early for political leader to take action. Just only in this occasion it works, that's what I think, because one of my Japanese friends who runs the sports university in Japan, he tried to vitalize sports exchange between North Korea and Japan for like 5, 6, 7 years. And sports exchange itself went very well, but it didn't affect, political situation at all. So we need some political condition readiness for that.
I see. And speaking of it in another way, some people claim that sports itself has been used as a platform for political and diplomatic agendas. Keeping this in mind, Frank, do you suppose this is appropriate?
I think that, getting back to the sort of previous question a little bit, I think that it can sort of soften animosity between countries when there are some sort of pre-existing conditions that indicate the two states or want to get together and have some type of negotiations. But there are limits to that. When the antagonism between the two states is too great, sports diplomacy isn't going to be able to provide a bridge to that gap. There are those outlying issues that may be intransigent that sports diplomacy can't really affect. It is unfortunate when politics gets in the way of sports, as we've seen happened in the past, and we can see how sports can help diplomacy a little bit now, and maybe the restriction to that. The Moon Jae-in administration has been criticized quite a bit for creating this joint women's ice hockey team for the Olympics and accused of using that politically to bring better relations between North and South Korea. At the same time, we need to recognize that there may be some limitations, particularly in terms of North-South and North Korean relations to the international community, that sports diplomacy won't be able to bridge.
So to a certain extent, sports can be used as a means of approach, especially in reaching out perhaps to reclusive nations under the appealing umbrella of peace and harmony. But in emphasizing peace and harmony in the Olympics, do we not stand in danger of perhaps overly politicizing this global sporting event, Elise?
Well, the politics starts at having teams that represent nation states. I mean, that's unavoidable. If you're going to have a team that represents all of Canada, or if you're going to have a team that represents all of Russia, then I don't know how you would separate the politics of it. You can tactically try and keep some sort of wall between these two matters, but when countries sort of have to confront one another in these events like the Olympics, and they have long political animosity like North Korea and South Korea, I don't know how you separate it that much when you have teams that represent the entire country.
So it's inevitable then, that link between politics and sports to a certain extent?
Yeah, well, it starts with the team itself, right?
Koichi, do you suppose the hosting of an international sporting event, or perhaps excelling in one sport on the global arena, raises the image of your country on the global stage?
I think so. It happened in 1964 in Japan, and 1988 in Seoul, and 2008 in Beijing. So I think the first Olympic will have such impact, but for Korea this is second time, so I don't know how it works. So we have to see.
We'll keep our fingers crossed and wait and see. Frank, we spoke of this quite a while back. We talked about the need for greater public interest in the upcoming Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Do you suppose stories regarding North Korea's participation in the Games have raised that interest among the public?
Oh, absolutely. That's an easy question to answer. You see a flood of journalists coming to Korea now, beyond what you'd expect just for the Olympic Games. And also, I've already had requests from different media for stories that focus on the aspect of North Korea participating in the Games. I'm sure that my colleagues here are getting, little indications from their assignment desks that they want more stories about North Koreans coming to the Olympic Games. There's a tremendous amount of international interest in this. And I think it'll be a good thing to see a different sort of aspect of North Korea be presented to the international community.
Elise, Frank talked about the joint ice hockey team for the female players from two Koreas. Aside from the controversy that is created, do you suppose the creation, the presence of that particular team itself will ensure that the Pyeongchang Olympics is remembered as the Peace Olympics?
I don't know. That seems like something that would be really difficult to predict how one particular Olympics is remembered, because we're talking about events that are happening in the future and not accounting for all the surprises that may happen during that time.
One of the interesting things I saw about the coverage that we've seen so far of the ice hockey team, women's ice hockey team, is the celebration that they had of one of the North Korean players having a birthday. And you had the players surrounding her cutting a cake, and the coach, who's Canadian, who had been a little bit critical of the decision to field a joint hockey team there with a big smile on her face, really seemed to be enjoying herself. And I think that as time passes, maybe the South Korean team will embrace the idea of having a joint hockey team.
Right, hopefully. Koichi, do you see the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics as perhaps fueling a greater sense of unity among the Korean people?
It depends. Well, when we see the Korean internet, there are many keywords. One is, Pyongyang Olympic. It's a kind of criticizing word for this Olympic, and also Peace Olympic. Two words are competing as a keyword.
한송월은 강릉에서 올림픽 전야 공연을 열고 김정은 평양에서 열병식을 여는 평창 올림픽 전야를 그야말로 대대적인 북한 체제 홍보로 가득 채우게 되는 것입니다.
평창 동계올림픽은 한반도 평화를 넘어 동북아의 그리고 세계의 평화를 앞당길 마중물이 될 것이라고 확신합니다. 여기에 평양 올림픽이라는 딱지를 붙이는 것은 이해할 수가 없습니다.
So, watching that situation, I can see that there are the South Korean people's image divided until now. But I think if the sport event itself starts, then we will see more united feeling, because in the end, the Olympic is a huge and joyful festival.
Right, hopefully following or after the opening ceremony this week, we'll see a greater sense of unity and perhaps the word peace surpassing the other word. Frank, what are some of the tasks that need to be tackled to ensure a successful Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang?
Well, I hope they're done now, because the Olympics are beginning, and I think the South Korean government and the people that prepared the Olympics, the IOC and the organizing committee here in South Korea, has pretty much finished its job, at least from our visit out there. Most of the finishing preparations that hadn't taken place yet when we visited just a few weeks ago had to do with the media setting up all their gear, and actually some of them building separate broadcasting booths on the mountainsides around the Olympics. So I think really all the preparations and everything that South Korea could have done has been done. And it's up to sort of unpredictable elements of sports competition and the Olympic Games to determine how we might look at the Games once they're finished.
Elise, do you see sports as being continued to be used as an effective tool against violent confrontations and perhaps instead to unite people and ensure world peace even in the future?
It all plays into what the political situation is. Like, sports isn't in a vacuum, right? They don't exist irrespective of the rest of the conditions going on between nation states. And so to the extent it can be used to show harmony and show, internationalism, then that's great. But let's not go too far and assume that it's just an Olympic Games on its own, being able to do that and carry that weight.
Right. Koichi, will you be there to cover the opening event?
Yes, I think so.
Are you ready to brave the weather? Because I hear it's going to be quite cold.
Yeah, I heard that, you know, we have to go 2 or 3 hours earlier before it starts, so I will be there by maybe 5-6 hours in that cold weather.
And hopefully I'll watch you on television. Right, late last month, Thomas Bach, the head of the International Olympic Committee, was in Pyeongchang to boost morale and to check on preparations so far. There, he claimed that the very act of marching in together during the opening ceremony by the athletes from the two Koreas is clear indication of their desire for peace. Thank you for watching.